Yeah. In terms of racism and studying that, I watched a little bit of our current president's rally yesterday. Um, and he was speaking at Mount Rushmore, saying that that students are being taught this idea of hate or something like that. And I was just like, what is that coming from? And I wanted to kind of connect that with one of the questions is and you know we've had discussion on how to teach race in schools. But do you think that tackling the topic of racism in elementary schools and in high schools in the U.S. is considered un-American? Like, and if not, like how can teachers approach that subject with their students? You know.
I think the topic of racism is not so much an American topic or
Mm-hmm.
issues, but
Mm-hmm.
it's a world issue.
Mm-hmm.
I truly believe that as human beings, we are all created equal and all should be treated equally.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter whether you are in Vietnam, whether you're in China, whether you're in the United States, Canada, Australia, Europe, Spain, France, England. It doesn't matter where you're at. This whole idea of hate is taught,
Mm-hmm.
and why are we, teaching that? I don't think we purposely teach that. I think it's done accidentally. More so, I guess, it's more so taught in the United States than anything else because the privilege will always want to stay at the top, and
Mm-hmm.
so there's that divide where I'm better than you type of attitude. I'm more superior, and it's been ingrained for generations. From our history way back when. When the Europeans, the white folks went and basically captures Africans and even South Asians and enslaving them bringing them to the United States. These are the type of histories that our students need to learn, and racism definitely should be taught as
Mm-hmm.
early as preschool,
Mm-hmm.
because if you look at kids interacting with each other, um, they don't see that. They don't see colors. They don't see black, white, yellow,
Mm-hmm.
Asians, Hispanic, Native Americans, or otherwise. And they play with each other until someone says that you can't play with that other person because they look
Mm-hmm.
different.
Right.
And so we really need to tackle this idea or this topic of racism, that's deep rooted,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, from very early childhood, because as students, as kids grows up, um, these things stays with them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yes, it's definitely very important that we, as an elementary school teacher, and I'm excited to go back to the classroom teaching second grade, because now I can even focus more in regards to making sure that my students understand that they are citizens of the world. They are citizens of their society, and
Mm-hmm.
that we need to make sure that we create a better society for ourselves and for our future and for the future generations.
Well, on the subject of elementary schools, I don't know if you were brought up in California education system during in elementary school, but we were taught a certain history of Californian colonial past, right? And with some with the movements right now to take down Confederate statues and other leaders in the past, in California in particular, there are some people that are taking down statues um, of this missionary that was like
Father
kind of,
Sierra.
yeah, Father's Sierra,
Hmm.
Seta, yeah. And so, and that's true. Like I can delineate the difference between like history can it's mostly taught in books and from other people, and I don't necessarily think that's statues are a statement. They're not a piece of history. You know, how should Californians in this specific case like understand that history? Because I think every state has a different past. You know, like over here on the West Coast, it's like, yeah, we do have to grapple Spanish colonialism. And on the East Coast, they have to deal with European colonialism. You know, like Britain, French, all of these other countries. So how can we tackle that? Should students know the hard truths of what happened to the Native American population?
Most definitely, because the history book is written by the victor.
Right.
Um, and history needs to be taught with perspective.
Hmm.
There's always two sides to everything. I taught fourth grade, and
Hmm.
California Mission is one of the standards. I'm very glad that we have rewritten that because um, the history books only talks about the victor side,
Hmm.
which is the missionary side. They talk about converting Native Americans, and they talk about, oh, well, we help them, civilize. Well, I'm sorry, but they were living their own culture. They were living civilly within their own, native land. And here we have all these people that came over and basically converting people.
Hmm.
And when they don't convert, that they get punished. They get I don't think the books ever talked about how when Native Americans are refused to convert, that they are being tortured, that they are, they don't, they make sure that they starve them.
Hmm.
They put them out in the sun. They do so many things to them that we would call it torture, and thus I mean, this is the perspective that we don't teach, that students don't get to hear.
Hmm.
um, so definitely you have to really put out the hard truth for our students to decide, because our system, our school system is set up way back when to fulfill the I guess the roles of assembly line workers and widget makers, if you will. And the desks are set up in roles.
Hmm.
It's education is not one size fits all.
Right.
Every student grows and matures and learn at their own pace.
Hmm.
Uh, and so this is something that the folks who are non-educators don't quite understand, because they think, oh well, they attended public schools. They use their experience as something um, uh, that they would use to make decisions. Many of the lawmakers, have never set foot in a classroom in teaching a class of 20 kids or 24 kids, or in the upper grades sometimes 40, 45 kids, 49
Hmm.
kids. I've actually had a class of fourth graders who a 40 class of 42 fourth graders.
Hmm.
So there's so many uh, things out there. There's so many, like, I guess you would say, um, people who are in decision making don't realize, don't see the struggles in the what we call the frontline workers now,
Hmm.
which is our educators, our teachers, our teachers aid, the cafeteria workers, the school bus drivers,
Mm-hmm.
the maintenance worker, the custodian, the office staff. So from the homeschool coordinator, you name it. They are the front line. They work with the students. They understand the day-to-day struggles.
Mm-hmm.
And every student comes in with, on a daily basis, with their own baggage.
Right.
And so we need to understand Maslow's hierarchy of needs in order for Bloom's taxonomy to actually work. Um, Maslow's hierarchy of needs to be filled, and so that's the one thing that I really want to get across. One of the reasons why I decided to run for school board is
Mm-hmm.
to really get at the forefront of conversations of education reform.
Mm-hmm.
People say our education system is broken. Well, it was set up for a certain system. It's set up for a certain way. And
Mm-hmm.
so now we are in the 21st century. So we need to look at it from a different perspective. We need to teach kids to think critically, to think creatively. We need to teach our students to communicate, to know how to communicate well, to collaborate, to cooperate, because our world is very different. We need to work with each other. So these are the important things that are being left out. And so, getting back to the questions of, all of these perspectives that needs to be in the room,
Mm-hmm.
because you know what, education is, like I said, not one size fits all,
That's
and unfortunately, we have the victors that determines how it's done.
that is very much true. And I wanted to kind of point out, if we do try to tackle this conversation of how native populations were affected by, say, the mission system, the Spanish colonial mission system, right? How, like, California itself has a large population of unrecognized tribes, and how are we going to try to tackle something like this when there's so many native nations within California that got decimated because of this mission system? And should it be local to that area? Like, we live in the San Gabriel Valley, like the Gabrielinos and the Tongva Nation, right?
Right,
They're an
right.
unrecognized um,
Hmm.
native tribe in California. And um, who gets to write, in this case, who gets to write the history books, and like, how can we be equitable in the places we live, and the education we
It's
give?
not so much about who gets to write it. I think it's about perspective.
Right.
And so we need to, hence ethnic studies is very critical,
Mm-hmm.
because, there's so many different perspectives. And just by understanding that there is not one view,
Mm-hmm.
we only see the victor's view,
Mm-hmm.
right? We only see the missionary's view. We're only taught the missionary's view. We're only taught the Europeans' point of view. I mean, seriously, we couldn't pick a better day of discussing this because, everybody's like, happy 4th of July or happy Independence Day. Well, I said, the independence for what, for who, from what, and from who?
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, this land was already here. There
Mm-hmm.
were people occupying this land. And then we had a set of people that came from Europe that came over and basically, took over the land, stole it, actually, and then made these people into calling them savages, calling them uncivilized. What gives us that right? You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And so these are perspective that needs to be put out there, and we need to, I guess, getting back to the question, who gets to write it? Well, we need to invite all of the elders from these native tribes to give us inputs. They need to be at the table. They
Yeah.
need to be, their languages are forgotten. One of the things that I am hoping to be more involved with is to develop and work with university to cultivate and develop native tribe languages, because it's being lost.
Mhm.
And I see that, even in our own culture. I mean, I feel so ashamed that I cannot speak Mandarin fluently.
Mhm.
I'm Chinese, but I can't speak Chinese fluently. I was fortunately I'm fluent in Vietnamese because I was born in Vietnam and that was my first language. So that's something that I really feel we need to focus in on, is showing our students pride in our own culture, in our own language, in our own
Mhm.
history. And so each group gets to have that, because we need to celebrate each group with that. And the only way to do that is to invite them to share their culture.
Mhm.
It's to invite them to come to the table to share the perspective and share what needs to be done. Because that's only then can we realize that we are actually truly embracing diversity. So, uh, and that's the other thing too, is that we don't have enough um, people of colors or in the teaching field. We need to do a better job of recruiting and retaining people of colors in the school setting, in the public school setting, because um, believe it or not, teachers are role models. And when a full class of 80% African Americans being taught by a white person, think how far the connection is going to be.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
I notice this very clearly whenever I speak Vietnamese to my students. They perk up. It's like, oh, wow,
Mhm.
and you see the difference. They all of a sudden starts to perform better
Mhm.
because they look up. They pay attention. Hey, there's somebody that looks like me. You
Mhm.
know, and again, look at all of the textbooks. You and I grew up. I mean, I went to school in the '80s. And '90s. You look at those textbooks, and there is nobody that looks like you and I.
Mhm. Yeah.
I mean, we're slowly getting there nowadays because we have more authors from a more diverse population of authors, but we're still struggling in the areas of textbooks.
Yeah. That's true.
Um, and that's where that's the reason. That's another reason why I choose to run for school board,
Mhm.
because we don't have enough people of colors in administrations and school boards. You look at the majority of the school board members, across the state.
Mhm.
I mean, we have to be better. We need to encourage folks like you and I to be running for elected offices,
Mhm.
because we're in the trenches. We understand our people so much better.
Yeah. I was gonna say, speaking of histories and what taught it what's been taught in schools is like, I remember when the chapters for the Vietnam War came up in high school, and you know, it just had a very U.S. centric view, and it never talked about the My Lai massacre in Vietnam, or
Oh yeah.
the Khmer Rouge,
Hmm.
was just a paragraph in those things. And like, to be fair, yeah, my inherent bias is, I'm Cambodian. Like, I want to know and understand that history. It's like, I want to understand, like, oh, there is a huge population of Cambodian, not just in the West Coast, but on the East Coast. And like that history of
Right.
movement, and for the Vietnamese community, it's like there's this long storied history of racism that they had to deal with in the South. When they all moved
Hmm.
to Houston, to Texas, to Louisiana, and took up the fishing industry and the shrimping industry. Like the KKK wanted to like basically murder Vietnamese in their boats.
Right.
um and these are things that I think if taught in such a way, it's like we can move above racism and understand that history of like there are people in power that want to push other people down, because there's inherent bias, and so.
Well, here's my take on that is
Hmm.
that you have the 1%
Hmm.
who have their privilege and they have their way of life.
Right.
When you have an increased number of people that don't look like you, that are slowly rising to power, rising to understanding of what's going on,
Hmm.
you all of a sudden now feel threatened because what's going to happen to your way of life. So what you do is you dumb down the masses, you basically starve them, and then throw a little crumb, um, and then tell them to fight each other for it. And that's exactly what we're seeing.
Hmm.
And then until we come together, and that's why this Black Lives Matters movement is so critical that we all must embrace it,
Hmm.
especially people. We have this stereotype that this whole racism too that we are taught.
Hmm.
The immigrant populations, the Asian population. I mean, it's like I have to slowly change my parents' point of view about African Americans. You
Hmm.
know, I mean, it's like they are people, and it's going to take many of us to confront our own stereotype, our own racism, our own um, unconscious bias.
Hmm.
Um, you know, and we have to do better as a human race. Otherwise, we're going to be a race. Uh, I mean, it's just that plain and simple. And everybody who goes out there and throws this term that all lives matter. Yes, all lives matter only if Black lives matter. I
Yeah.
mean, if you're saying that all lives matter and you don't care about what happened with George Floyd, then how the hell do you know can say that all lives matter?
Yeah. And it in terms of like teaching race and history, and in the high schools or in the elementary schools, it's just almost as if it's taught as something as like, oh, we've dealt with it and we're done, and it's not a continued conversation. And I think that's something that's been missing in I think in the public school system. It's like, oh, it's not. Yeah, like they're taught
It's checklist,
it's taught as driving Miss Daisy versus do the right thing.
right?
Yeah.
Well,
And
it's basically a checklist.
yeah.
And we, as an educator, I truly believe we need to teach our kids to think critically, to
Hmm.
think creatively, to be their innovative self. And as an educator, I see my job as to look at my students and see what they're good at and point
Hmm.
them in that direction. Because it's not one size fits all.
Hmm.
Students learn differently. Students are given with different gifts and then talents. And you're good at this whole journaling thing, this whole podcasting stuff. I'm good at something else. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so we need to look at the talents that are coming to us and unleashing that,
Hmm.
and pointing that out to our students, because they need guidance.
Hmm.
Um, Education is uh, it's not about reading, writing, arithmetic.
Mm-hmm.
It's about building the next generation to be better than the ones before.
Mm-hmm.
It's about teaching our youngs to care, to love, to be kind, to choose kindness, to have compassion, to be able to collaborate and cooperate, and to problem solve. And that's what is missing. You
Mm-hmm.
know, where we're being targeted, we're being dictated to this conversation, this dialogue about achievement gaps, about test scores, about performance, about raw data. All that is fooey.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't get the kids to have 3 meals a day, and emotionally right, how is that child going to learn?
True.
So I mean, if we're not able to do that correctly, then how on earth are we going to be able to get our kids to what they need to be?
Yeah.
And so this whole inequity is just nobody talks about it.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody talks about the achievement gap, but does anybody talk about the resource gap, the opportunity gaps? We're
Mm-hmm.
slowly heading towards that direction, because a number of us educators are purposely using these terminologies because it should be our conversation, not someone else's.